Holocaust education is absolutely essential. But I think it may be confusing some of our young people about anti-Semitism because they learn about big, strong Nazis hurting weak, emaciated Jews. And they think, oh, anti-Semitism is like anti-black racism, right? Powerful white people against powerless black people. So when on TikTok all day long they see powerful Israelis hurting weak, skinny Palestinians, it's not surprising that they think, oh, I know, the lesson of the Holocaust is you fight Israel. You fight the big, powerful people hurting the weak people.
Bro, that's bar for bar what I have talked about, except I think it's good to do Holocaust education and also learn those lessons. She thinks it's bad. Former Obama speechwriter Sarah Hurwitz laments to Jewish Federation that people are finding content from Al Jazeera and Nick Fuentes on social media and seeing the videos of the carnage in Gaza. And she basically says something that I've been saying for the longest time. This is something that I've brought up quite a bit. But the difference is, for her, it's basically saying the quiet part out loud. Because, like, you know what my perspective on Israel-Palestine is. You know what my perspective on Gaza is. Let's take a look.
Since October 7th, but really before then, there have been huge shifts in America on how people think about Jews and Israel. And I think that is especially true of young people. So we are now wrestling with a new, I think, generational divide here. And I think that's particularly true in that social media is now our source of media. And this, it used to be that the media you got in America was American media, and it was pretty mainstream. It generally didn't express extreme anti-Israel views. You had to go to a pretty weird bookstore to find global media and fringe media. But today, we have social media, which is a global medium, right? Its algorithms are shaped by billions of people worldwide who don't really love Jews. And so while in the 1990s, a young person probably wasn't going to find Al Jazeera or someone like Nick Fuentes, today those media outlets find them. They find them on their phones. It's also this increasingly post-literate media.
First of all, aside from the fact that she said it's like weird bookstores or whatever, like what she's saying is not wrong, right? The energy that she's putting to it is obviously negative, but what she's saying is correct. The pro-Israel narrative was dominant in mainstream discourse. However, nowadays with the democratization of the media, with the invention of social media and information that you can find easily online, especially with the algorithm. No, I don't think Al Jazeera hates Jews, chatters. Of course not. But the point is, what she's saying is true as far as how much the outlets, how many new outlets there exists, right? And how much that has factored into discourse shifting on Israel. That part is correct. She's basically saying the correct thing, but has the exact opposite opinion that I do, with one exception. Nick Fuentes is anti-Semitic. She thinks foreign news is inherently expressing extreme views against Israel. Lamau just admitted the U.S. media runs cover for everything they do. Exactly. That's exactly what it is. As far as her saying, like, nowadays people are getting information, extreme information. Like, when she says extreme information about Israel, she's wrong. It's not extreme information. It's just true. It's just the correct information on Israel. She's obviously upset about it. But hold on. Let's continue. Yeah, Al Jazeera equals Fuentes is the crazy one. One is a Nazi. The other one's a respected international news outlet. Exactly. But from where she's standing, there is no difference between Al Jazeera and Nick Fuentes. And I assume there would not be a lot of difference between Al Jazeera and Nick Fuentes and someone like myself either.
Less and less text, more and more videos. So you have TikTok just smashing our young people's brains all day long with video of carnage in Gaza. And this is why so many of us can't have a sane conversation with younger Jews, because anything that we try to say to them, they are hearing it through this wall of carnage. So I want to give data.
Yeah. Oh, we're trying to have data-backed conversations. We're trying to have honest conversations with younger Jews, but we can't because all they see is the real carnage that Israel is doing in Gaza. It's like, no, you're just upset that you can't brainwash young Jews anymore because they know the truth about Israel. They see the reality that Israel is committing, the carnage. I'm sorry, but the wall of carnage, which is the reality of what Israel is doing, is exactly the reason why people are no longer with Israel, because there's no way to control the flow of information and contextualize that violence, or at least shelter the population from that violence. And that's precisely the reason why, yes, people are not believing bullshit coming out of Israel any longer. But wait, there's more.
Data and information and facts and arguments, and they are just seeing in their minds carnage, and I sound obscene. And,
by the way, it's because you are obscene. You are literally trying to do genocide defense. It's so funny. She's like, I come across as obscene when I try to defend my favorite fascist ethno-state that's currently committing a genocide. It's really fucked fucked up.
Well, I think, unfortunately, the very smart, bet that we made on Holocaust education to serve as anti-Semitism education, in this new media environment, I think that is beginning to break down a little bit.
This is why I said this is like literally what I talk about a lot. She just has the opposite opinion of me on this issue.
Because, Holocaust education is absolutely essential. But I think it may be confusing some of our young people about anti-Semitism because they learn about big, strong Nazis hurting weak, emaciated Jews. And they think, oh, anti-Semitism is like anti-black racism, right? Powerful white people against powerless black people. So when on TikTok all day long they see powerful Israelis hurting weak, skinny Palestinians, it's not surprising that they think, oh, I know, the lesson of the Holocaust is you fight Israel. You fight the big, powerful people hurting the weak people.
Bro, that's bar for bar what I have talked about, except I think it's good to do Holocaust education and also learn those lessons. She thinks it's bad. That's the difference between never again means never again for everyone versus never again means never again just for Jews. If your attitude is never again means never again just for Jews, what the did you think? Like, no, the Holocaust happened. It was a uniquely evil incident and it must never happen again, which is why we have to be as violent as we want to be in Israel. And you can't say a damn thing about it. That's the education, or that's the understanding that she has over this. Whereas, as I have explained over and over again, never again means never again for everybody. And of course, like the entire point of the Holocaust and Holocaust education is so that we learn from the evils of the Holocaust, the evils of the Nazi regime. Even the mention of like the weak, emaciated Jew is like, I think, a not so subtle reference to the anti-Semitism that you often hear from Zionists. The anger and resentment that some Zionists feel towards victims of the Holocaust as like weak Jews. The notion that like Zionism means you are a strong Jew, a powerful Jew, a violent one that does not find violence to be repugnant. Of course, I, jokingly referenced this. I said, Holocaust education is too successful. It made the kids anti-Holocaust while Israel is trying to do one. Because that's basically the perspective here. And what's crazier about this is that like this position is Kahanis. It's like an ultra Zionist position. It's not supposed to be a normal position. This is such a unique insight. I mean, it's not so unique if you use the translate button that no longer exists on Twitter for Hebrew, but it is actually almost refreshing in how open this is. Jeet here says, pro-Israel advocates argues that her side is losing public opinion among young people because 1, the wide circulation of horrific images from Gaza, and 2, Holocaust education creating anti-racist worldview. This does not lead her to question her worldview. It's just crazy. It's crazy to just like openly state that the Holocaust education that we correctly tied to anti-Semitism was a brilliant move, except for when that Holocaust education also moved beyond just anti-Semitism and moved in the direction of teaching Americans about anti-black racism and teaching Westerners about the dynamic between the oppressed and the oppressor. And understandably, many people who weren't brainwashed early on and successfully into having a firm commitment of loyalty to the state of Israel looked at that, learned the right lessons, and realized that never again means never again for all. And then the lesson is that Israel is currently doing a genocide, and that is also unacceptable. This is also crazy because like she's supposed to be a progressive. She's a speechwriter for Obama. This is an unimaginably racist statement. Because Zionism is a racist ideology. It's so crazy that this is a major contradiction in the minds of like otherwise quote unquote progressive people. This is a purely evil statement. Nobody reads it in the same way, or at least more and more people are starting to read it in the same way, but there's still tremendous amounts of pushback. What are we doing? What are we doing here? Like, you're Obama speechwriter. If you talk this way about the Klan versus black people, people would understand that you are a white supremacist. But when you talk about Israel versus Palestinians, people still have not reached a level of understanding that you are operating on the same exact supremacist, fascist belief system. Do you understand?
You also don't really learn about Islamist anti-Semitism and Soviet anti-Zionism, which is so much of what I'm seeing, especially on campus with young people today. And I think that zooming back,
I don't know why the chatter said give us her full quote, because this literally makes it worse. She then follows it up with all of the anti-Israel sentiment comes from Islamist anti-Semitism and Soviet anti-Zionism, which again, inherently white supremacist construct. Why? Because the Soviets are white. I assume she has like some kind of Eastern European heritage, Ashkenazi Jew, and therefore it's different. The Soviet anti-Zionism, still bad, just different than Islamist anti-Semitism. Like as though Muslims only oppose Israel because of some ancient anti-Semitic tendencies, and not because post-1948 Israel has been an incredibly violent entity in the region that was specifically designed as a settler colonial apparatus to destabilize the entire region and kill a ton of Palestinians, both Muslims and Christians alike. Allowing anti-Zionism into the convo, but only through a non-Arab lens. Yes. No, for sure. For sure. That is also by design, for the record. That is also deliberate. Make no mistake. It's so goddamn annoying. Crazy part of this is at 140 when she backhandedly argues against Holocaust education because it can lead people to sympathize with American black people and Palestinians. The reason why I find this to be illuminating is because I say this all the time. The reason why Americans are so knowledgeable, it all ties back to American foreign policy, okay? Israel played a formative role as a Cold War ally to the United States of America. It's played an incredibly important role throughout numerous different forms of American foreign policy, okay? And as a bulwark against socialism in the region when pan-Arabic nationalism was moving in the direction of offering sympathies and loyalties to the USSR with, anti-imperialist ideology, anti-colonialist ideology, Israel was still the very same destabilizing factor that it plays today. Israel also played a formative role in espionage in the region. It was a, forward operating base, an unsinkable aircraft carrier, yada, yada, yada. But because it was such a profoundly important aspect of American foreign policy at the time, and still is seen even in modernity as like a very important part of American foreign policy, which I think is changing a little bit as well, because it's like kind of outliving its usefulness, but that's a totally separate point. All of that importance is the reason why Zionist education was basically allowed on American soil and was as successful as it was on U.S. soil, because America looked at the situation and was like, no, it's great. It's great. You can have as much pro-Israel sympathies as you'd like. This is a very important ally. And the ways in which Zionist education was paired up with anti-Semitism education was also successful. This is why I say that as far as marginalized identities goes, especially in modern day when there is no systematic discrimination towards Jews in the United States of America, while there is racism, like anti-Semitism towards Jews, the persecution of Jews is not the same as it used to be historically, and it's certainly different than the persecution of black people, brown people at the systematic level in the United States of America. Anti-Semitism seemingly is the only type of bigotry that has no institutional permission whatsoever. It's the one type of bigotry that like you just cannot engage with, and that's part of the reason why Nick Fuentes and many other right-wingers who are anti-Semitic actually exhaust this contradiction and exhaust this hypocrisy to their own benefit. But the real reason for that is not because Jews are magical people with the power of hypnosis, or as Nick Fuentes says, organized Jewry.
I am saying that the problem is organized Jewry.
The real reason for that is because, like I described, the American government broadly considered Israel to be an important part of their foreign policy apparatus, and therefore all of this Zionist education was encouraged. Not just allowed, but encouraged, as the chatter also correctly pointed out. This way, Americans could also feel comfortable about this allegiance and sending hundreds of billions of dollars to this tiny state the size of New Jersey over the course of 80 years. That's also the reason why AIPAC does not get hit with a FARA restriction, doesn't have to register as a foreign agent. That's the same reason why there are not only lobbying initiatives, but also educational initiatives that play a formative role in changing people's consciousness or changing people's attitudes about Israel early on. And that's the reason why anti-Semitism, even if it's being cynically deployed against critics of Israel, or especially when it's deployed against critics of Israel cynically, is seen as the only type of bigotry that is not allowed, right? There's a bipartisan consensus on censorship and deplatforming, cancellations, whatever you want to call it, for critics of Israel. And here is former Obama speechwriter Sarah Hurwitz saying the quiet part out loud. The reason why the Holocaust education was so good, especially when tied against anti-Semitism education, was because we could have made a positive argument towards Israel and why Israel must exist and why Israel must be a violent country. But now people are looking at the Holocaust education and going, well, never again means never again for all, especially if it's not paired up with a ton of Zionist propaganda early on and social conditioning, brainwashing, and the like. That's the problem. Young Jews are not buying it. They're not buying the pro-Israel arguments. They're not buying the pro-Israel arguments, and they're encountering the truth about Israel far before they actually go on that birthright trip by college, or by high school, whenever people do birthright. That is a major issue. That is the issue. And that is, I suspect, a big part of the reason why there is this attitude towards anyone who's a loud and proud and outspoken critic of Israel. There is this universalization of like anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, which is a dangerous conflation that actually does not serve the interests of Jews in general, but it's being done regardless. And here's Bari Weiss doing that. Chris Menahan says, well said, Hasan. Did you see that Bari Weiss took aim at you at the Jewish Leadership Conference on Sunday? They're not releasing any of the videos from the event, or else I'd clip them. Bari Weiss told the Jewish Leadership Conference she'll use her position at CBS News to counter voices like Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson, Andrew Tate, and Hasan Piker. One of these things is not like the others. Can you tell who's different than the rest of these guys? Think about that. Think about how primarily invested you must be in Israel to look at 4 individuals, popular in very different ways, okay? 3 of them virtually identical worldviews, or at least are on the same side politically. The other is on the exact opposite side politically. But what is the reason why Bari Weiss says these guys are all the same? How schizophrenic do you have to be to look at Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson, Andrew Tate, and then add Hasan Piker into that equation? I'm sorry, but if you look to that mention by Bari Weiss and you go, that's right, this is dangerous. That's right, this is a dangerous prospect. All of these guys are the same. You are not living in the same universe that we are all living in. Anyway, Yusuf Munayer says, so the lesson people are supposed to take from the Holocaust education is that genocide, mass killing, and war crimes are actually okay. What is really remarkable about this is that they still don't understand how absurd this sounds and how many people will turn away from it in disgust. This is especially stunning considering the Holocaust is mandated to be taught in some 30 states as a result of state laws, which have been the product of important work done by American Jewish communities. I am not sure any other historical world history episode is so broadly taught in the U.S. Her comments about the weak, feeble Jew and young Jews are now seeing themselves Palestinians is bar for bar Jabotinsky. Yeah, to take the typical Yid of today and to imagine his diametrical opposite in his tribute to Theodore Herzl, said Jabotinsky. Our starting point is to take the typical Yid of today and to imagine his diametrical opposite, because the Yid is ugly, sickly, lacks decorum. We shall endow the ideal image of... By the way, Jabotinsky is literally the OG Jewish fascist. Theodore Herzl aside, like, he was the other OG godfather of Zionism and was like a straight up Jewish Nazi. Like the type of attitude that you hear from, the average Israeli ultranationalist. Yid is shortened for Yiddish, and probably a slur, as a matter of fact, right? I don't know, but I assume he means it as a pejorative. I have a question. How can you be a socialist but also have the control of all the world's capital banks? Didn't the Nazis see the contradiction? What are you talking about? This is just pure hatred. Okay, you need to understand, you need a good villain, okay? And for the Nazis, it was the Jews. And it was anything that was woke, really, but definitely the Jews. And at this point, you have to realize, like, when people hate you, they just make it up. There's no need for contradiction. There's no need to understand contradictions. It's no different than the way people operate towards me, for example. There's a lot of people out there that just, like, despise me and have decided, there's a lot of fascists that have decided, like, I am their number one op. So no matter what I do, they will find a way to just say, like, oh, you are both simultaneously powerful and weak at the same time. I'm incredibly gay, woke, and weak, but also in control of Twitch, for example, But also, Twitch bans me because I'm dangerous and worthy of being banned. The Yid is trodden upon and easily frightened, and therefore the Hebrew ought to be proud and independent. The Yiddish is despised by all, and therefore the Hebrew ought to charm all. The Yiddish has accepted submission, and therefore the Hebrew ought to learn how to command. The Yiddish want to conceal his identity from strangers, and therefore the Hebrew should look to the world straight in the eye and declare, I am a Hebrew. The dynamic between Yiddish and Hebrew, by the way, is not only a reflection of Jews that lived in Eastern Europe and whatnot, or Jews that lived in Germany, and Hebrew being Israelis, okay? The point is that attitude won. Okay, that attitude won. That is the common attitude now. That is now the common attitude in Israel. That is the common attitude of the Zionist.